Hello, hi everyone. Welcome back to Woo Can Cook. My name is Wesley, and this is a show where we are slowly cooking our way through all of the food from my childhood. Today we're adding to our series on foods inspired by TV and film with some inspiration from this clip from New Girl.
Put the dumpling down.
Relax.
You just gasp.
I'm having it one
Down.
Does this food have MSG in it?
What?
Oh my god, MSG makes my jaw lock.
Wait a minute. How? No MSG.
Listen, Jess, Chinese food is MSG. America is living a lie.
Okay, so for those keeping track, what Nick is eating here is a pretty straightforward pot sticker, which we have already made in this series many times. And if you are looking for that, definitely check out our Ling Lings and Gyoza hack here. So instead, I thought I'd take this as an opportunity to explore another dumpling that many folks have been requesting basically since I started this series, which is a shumai. For those not familiar, shumai is a classic dim sum dumpling most typically made from ground pork, shrimp, and veggies, then placed inside of a very thin wonton wrapper and gently steamed in a bamboo basket. Its signature open face makes it one of the easiest dumplings to make since there are no intricate pleats or folds involved at all, and it's basically just a ball of filling pressed into a wrapper. I also thought this would be a great opportunity to explore the uses of MSG a little bit more, which is my favorite part about this New Girl scene, because that stuff is literally in all Chinese food, even if a restaurant says they don't cook with MSG, because they're lying. Okay, so let's get into it. Everybody wants to be the baby, and you're dying if you think that you don't know. Never mind, I thought you still don't love yourself. Okay, kicking things off first, I'm starting with my ground pork today. Into my mixing bowl here is 4 tablespoons of soy sauce and 1 tablespoon of sesame oil to start. Then next is 2 tablespoons of oyster sauce for a bit of fishy umami and 1 tablespoon of rice vinegar for a bit of brightness. Then I'm adding my ground pork to the bowl here. I'm not really sure why I didn't have it in the bowl to begin with. That was a weird thing to do. Anyway, this is 8 ounces or half a pound of ground pork going in, followed by my dry elements. This is 1 tablespoon of cornstarch to help things bind together, followed by a tablespoon of brown sugar and half a teaspoon each of chicken bouillon powder and white pepper. Now, for those who are keeping track, like I mentioned earlier, we are not specifically using MSG in our recipe today, but that half teaspoon of bouillon powder is absolutely packed with MSG, as is that soy sauce and oyster sauce that we added earlier as well. So whether you meant to or not, if you're making Chinese food, you are inevitably going to end up incorporating MSG at some point because it's in all of these ingredients. So even if Justin Chan's very charming face promises you that there is no MSG in his food, most likely he's probably lying. Anyway, I'm setting this aside to marinate for 30 minutes or up to 1 hour while we move on to our veggies next. Alright, diving into my veggies here, I'm kicking things off with 4 cloves of crushed and minced garlic, followed by 1 inch or about 1 tablespoon of finely minced ginger. Then next up are my carrots, which I'm peeling and large dicing. If you've got thin little carrots like me here, be sure to get rid of this end where it tapers off, because that bit can get a little bit bitter. Next up are a couple of green onions, which I'm separating, then slicing the whites thinly and the greens on a wider bias cut to help those leafier bits stand out. And finally, last up are my shiitake mushrooms, which I'm rehydrating in boiling water until tender, then removing their stems and giving a large dice. I'm working with some thinner shiitake mushrooms here, so these only take about 5 minutes to rehydrate, but if you're using the thicker stuff, those can take up to 20 minutes or so, so if that's what you've got, definitely start rehydrating those a little bit earlier. Okay, so I'm cooking for some picky eaters today that don't like shrimp, so I'm just doing half a batch with shrimp, which is going to be 4 ounces or about 6 shrimp, peeled, deveined, and diced. If you don't need to do this though, go with 8 ounces or about a dozen shrimp for your own attempts. In either case, I'm going with some shrimp that has already been deveined, as you can see here. This is going to save us quite a bit of work and it only costs an extra couple bucks at the market, so choose for yourself accordingly. I'm seasoning this with a pinch of kosher salt, then setting that aside while we dive into our wrappers next. Alright, so as some of you might have noticed, what we have here today are some square wonton wrappers because for the life of me, I can't seem to find any round ones. So this is totally optional and you can absolutely just use square wrappers if you want. You'll just end up with some weird pointed corners sticking out of your finished shumai. But if you want a clean presentation, these do need to be round. So I'm putting a round whiskey glass on top of my wrappers here, then trimming off these edges as best as I can until we're left with a mostly round wrapper. Close enough, I guess. Anyway, circling back to our ground pork here, I'm finally combining this with my veggies, then giving it all a very thorough toss to combine. Then next, if you're making a half batch without shrimp like me, I'm setting half of this aside, then combining the remainder with my shrimp. Alright, next up, we're diving into our dumpling making next, which if you're used to making pot stickers is going to be much easier in comparison. I'm taking my wonton wrapper, then placing it in between my thumb and forefinger, then placing about half a tablespoon of filling in the center and pushing it down between my fingers to create that signature shumai shape. At this point, you might be tempted to use the spoon end of your spoon to help pack things in like a normal person, but I assure you the back of that spoon is actually going to be your best friend at this point, which as it happens is almost exactly the shape of a shumai. Finally, just like any dumpling making process, remember that you're only going to get better at this over time, so don't be discouraged if your first couple are a complete disaster. Next up, I've got my bamboo steamer out and I'm lining the bottom of it with cabbage or lettuce if you forgot to get cabbage like me. This is going to help prevent your shumai from sticking to the basket when we're done cooking. It's also equally as effective as parchment paper with the added bonus that it's totally edible, so if it doesn't separate from the dumpling like it's supposed to, it's not the end of the world. I'm adding my shumai to the basket here, being very careful to make sure that none of these touch each other, and we're heading over to the stove. Over on the stove, I have a medium-sized pot at a rolling boil, then I'm adding my steam baskets on top. Then we're gonna try a whole bunch of different camera angles only to discover that there is legitimately no way of fitting this all in frame. Oh well. Either way, I'm covering this up and letting it steam for 12 minutes on medium-high heat. Meanwhile, while that's going, I'm throwing together a quick dipping sauce here, which we're more or less borrowing from last week's xianbing recipe. This is 4 tablespoons of soy sauce combined with 1 tablespoon of chili crisp oil or lao gan ma, 1 tablespoon of rice vinegar, and 1 teaspoon of brown sugar. Back over on the stove 12 minutes later, we should be greeted by maybe one of the most glorious reveal shots that I've done in quite a while. I'm removing this from heat to prevent any carryover cook, and we're ready to eat. Okay, so I've been making dumplings with my family for pretty much my whole life, and after attempting what feels like almost every dumpling that you can possibly imagine, this is easily my favorite one to make relative to the amount of work spent making them. It's wonderfully rich and juicy thanks to the fat from our ground pork and marinade. The shrimp and shiitake add a really classic combination of umami and pair really nicely with the mellow heat from our chili crisp oil in our dipping sauce. Then those super thin wonton wrappers give a nice doughy texture that's not overwhelmingly thick or chewy, as is often the case with some of those thicker skinned dumplings that you'll come across. Finally, maybe most importantly for those attempting this themselves, I think I finished this one in under an hour because of how quick and easy it is to wrap these. So if you're in the business of finding a fun and easy dumpling to make with your friends and family, this should be a great one to try. Okay, so that's it everyone. I hope you enjoyed this and I hope you give this one a shot. As I mentioned earlier, we have now done many different kinds of dumplings on this channel at this point, so definitely check some of those out next if you haven't yet. We'll be cooking through this one live right here on YouTube at 6:30 PST this coming Tuesday, so tune in then and cook along with me if you want. For those local to the California Bay Area, my band Trace Repeat is finally playing its first public show since 2020, this Saturday at Treasure Fest in San Rafael, so swing by and come say hi if you want. More about that at tracerepeat.com/tour. As always, like, comment, subscribe, share, be nice, and I'll see you soon. Bye.